because we might not, but there's definitely opportunity to. So we have access to all these things that we previously had broken apart. Alright, so far so good. So we'll get rid of that guy because the highlighting is annoying. Okay, so the idea is that we're going to be passing along this game response and be acted upon. So one of the issues we have inside of here is that previously we had our execute action, so our command, take in a request and send back a response. So we kind of want to take in the game response and return back the same game response. So let's keep that in mind. And so I'll leave that red. But game response dot request dot target Okay. The room. Let's move this guy over here. We should have a player now if it's gone through the off. Okay, so this is, and I should be definitely be trained to all this looking very similar. Can we refactor that? Maybe so, maybe no. And once we get this cleaned out a bit more, it should be pretty clear whether or not we can optimize it. I want to catch up on chat for a second because it sounds like there's a lot happening. All right, so first thing from Smudge, the request handler. All right, so request handler is just a local field inside of the hive mind that we set in the static constructor. All right, what's next? Game response should be request context. Maybe, maybe not. I see where you're going with that in terms of our definition of game response has kind of changed with the implementation of this pattern. Before it was legitimately just the response we're getting back. But you might have a point in that now that we're actually turning into this mutable thing that's being passed through our system, we want it to be the context, and not until we get to the finalize do we actually want to output a game response. So it's a totally fair. I think it's a good idea. And then Smudge says the handler should be responsible for restoring health, damage, etc. At the moment, the handlers are more validator than handler. That's true. And so we're implementing the handler at this level, right? So right now we're at the level of the hive mind, and we've kind of regulated responsibility of a lot of things down to the player class, as far as the hive mind simply passing on this request. It's validating it's validating that it's a legitimate request. That part's true. So it is a validator or a gatekeeper, but then it's leaving it up to the actual player. That's the player object to actually carry out that request. Grun says, right now this command handler looks more like a command dispatcher with intimate knowledge of the commands. My guess is that this is just a temporary state and refactoring will continue. And then Smudge says, Grun's explains my point much better. That's actually fair. It's completely valid. So, and we might get there. We might get to the point where we can truly have the guts of these handlers be what they're supposed to be. So whatever we have on the internal right now, whatever offenses the code's committed, we've inherited those from gutting out the hive mind, right? Because the hive mind itself was definitely going down that road of being this dispatcher, mediator, one-size-fits-all place to do these operations. So the handlers, the architecture behind them, inside of the base handler, should be sound, at least in the sense that we've taken it right from the book. Our implementation might be flawed, and we'll see that once we get a little bit closer. And then Turney says, "I see you finally managed to work in a Coalesce operator." I did, Turney. I think we're all happy about that. It was definitely a hammer looking for a nail. Okay, so let's continue on with the refactoring. All right, so we've already, just by getting the login stuff out and the command stuff out, we have really slimmed up our execute method nearly to where we want it. And then we want all this to go into finalize. We'll import that, but we'll return everything else. Oh, not that. We'll leave that in there. Okay. And then we're returning response here. All right, so the last thing we need to yank out of this before we actually dive into each handler and start to bit of refactoring is this little bit. This little bit was placed in there to say, hey, if this thing is out of, if the sender of the target is out of play, then we don't want to do anything. We want to return an out of play response and then just kick back out to the user. We wanted to ignore that if the action was login, and we're checking for both sender and target. So we need to find a good home for this. All right, so why don't we just leave this here for a second and let's take a fresh look at our auth handler. So you can't see this, but essentially our client checks to see if we've got a player. And if we don't have a player, then it sends through this, it assumes you're trying to log in and it asks you to type in your name, and then it sends through your name, and then it gets here, and it tries to get your player by name and return that back to you. So and then inside the command handler, this is going to be the successor that we have defined. And if it's a login, it's going to just say, hey, forget about it, and break. And it's going to go to the finalize handler. So if we've gotten this far, we can kind of assume that we've got both a sender and a target. So I think that makes this a pretty good place to put in. And actually, hang on real quick. There's someone at my door. Poor timing, but my dog will go crazy if I don't get it. Oh my goodness. Alright, sorry about that. I've got a adorable rescue dog, and he wouldn't hurt a fly, but ever since moving into a house, his primal doggy instincts have come alive. Okay, so I think a good place for this, or a safe place for the time being, is going to be inside of the command handler. And I'm going to throw that there. We're going to get rid of the, we can leave it there, but really instead of doing this here, let's just do this. If game response dot request dot game action is equal to game actions dot login, return game response. So first line, if it comes in, hey, this was a login thing, just bounce back out. To make it more sophisticated with the chain of responsibility, we could have that kind of idea of composition inside of the hive mind, and something like a builder pattern, saying, hey, if this is of type if this is a GameX type login, then build your chain of responsibility this way. If it's something else, build it this way. And so we had that flexibility in the future to start doing this kind of like dynamic or runtime compilation and changing the behavior based off what actions come in. So things like this won't be necessary, right? Even these little lines of code are out of place in our handle request because this really should be, based off our architecture, handled someplace else. If you're watching this on YouTube later, there's an inspired debate happening